Hello, sorry, first blooper of the day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Quantum Witch Cafe and the monthly UAP Book Club. This month, we're talking about messengers of deception, UFO contacts, and cults. And um, we have a lovely panel today, as usual. It's a little smaller today because Vinny's getting ready for his Lou thing and all that stuff. So it's just going to be us today. And everybody in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you're listening on Anomalous Podcast Network, thank you so much for joining. If you're watching later on YouTube, thanks again. I appreciate all the support from everybody. And if you're live, as always, you're amazing and the best. All right, guys, let's start. So let's go around and kind of give like overall impressions of the book. And I'll start with Graeme.
So it's a long time since I've read anything by Jacques, which is probably sacrilege amongst these kind of like lofty kind of positions here. The last time I read one was Passport to Magonia when I was about maybe 15 or 16, so it's a long time ago. And what I've heard since has never entirely sort of made me running back to Vallée for some reason. And I'm going to get real hate mail in my inbox now for saying things like this. But thank you for getting me to come back to this book, because it's a one that makes you think. Now, my kind of default view for cults and all these kind of things, the contactee kind of societies from the 50s and 60s, is that they were just like, either in search of a buck, or they found a way to make money, or they were just trying to fool people, or they were deluded. You pick any one that you want. And I still have kind of those views today, because I keep thinking that there's all these people who promise this is that and the other's going to happen, and then it never does. And Vallée says that in the book, because he comes back to the fact that these people who he meets up with and who are practicing love and light and contact with people from who knows where, channeling information through these various people on Earth, and they're promising things, and it never happens. And that's a recurrent theme through the book. But there's also bits thrown in which I keep thinking, why is that there for? And I still haven't come to terms with some of it. And it's one of these books, again, that like American Cosmic, that you're going to have to read several times for it all to sink in. It's not a nuts and bolts book, and that's what I'm used to. So that's probably why I struggle as well. Just a case in point, I mean, the questions about the MiG-21, the Cuban MiG-21s that were lost in the Tehran F-4 Phantom from 76. They're thrown in at the start of a chapter about intelligence, but then it's not covered afterwards. So I keep thinking, well, why have you thrown these in? And it wasn't immediately clear, and it's still not clear to me at the moment why that's there. I'm sure somebody here is going to fill me in. But so there's a lot of questions in this book, and he's asking questions of various things, but I'm not entirely sure he answers them all to any great degree. And I'm left with more questions than I had when I started, which might be a good thing.
Yeah, I think that I resonate with a lot of that, because it was like, I started with all this just kind of like knowing my experiences and what they meant. But then after reading this, like and American Cosmic, I'm like, holy crap. It's like reformatted how I'm viewing everything. And this one here was full of questions and not a lot of answers, but a lot of interesting questions have come up. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I think I'll start by saying I feel like I'm an unapologetic Vallée-ian. I'm very much in the vein of Jacques Vallée, kind of studying whatever the heck this is doing to us, in part because I don't have direct access to whatever it actually is. So it's sort of, I really resonate with him in his kind of attempt to understand what's underneath it by just looking at what it's causing people to do. So if you've read Passport to Magonia, it's not that kind of too divergent from that book. I think Passport Magonia is definitely where I would start if you haven't read any Vallée. I think it's a good one to begin with, because it gets into more of kind of the history of ufology and looks at a lot of kind of corollaries and ancient experiences to modern UFO experiences. This book, for me, it was. I got to be honest. Well, before I get to this point, I want to say, I'm so grateful to have Jacques Vallée. So, this book is 40 years old. It's about as old as I am. And actually, I think it is as old as I am. And so, reading it and thinking about the things that we're talking about in our kind of weekly discussions, it kind of honestly is a little bit frustrating because it's like we haven't gotten that far in our understanding of what this is. And I think where he lands at the end of the book is really, quite frankly, where we are still struggling to get to right now. And that is that when you kind of take into consideration all of the things that are out there, all of the nuts and bolts, combined with the various experiences, combined with the cultish groups that he talks about, and all of these things, if you're going to try to explain them in one comprehensive way, we need a model that does that adequately. And he tries to, and he proposes a couple of those. And he says, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I don't particularly agree with the first couple that he put forward. There's kind of like a human group that has really mastered this in some way. But I do think I think he's unsettled by that decision too. I think you kind of get the sense that he knows it lies beyond. Graeme, like you said, he doesn't really kind of come to a very pinpoint conclusion here. It's an invitation in a way to say we've still got to put more into this than what we have so far to understand what's going on. So very much enjoyed it. I didn't kind of enjoy the sort of detailed interworkings of like the cults that he studies as much, other than for me to say, and we'll get into this in the discussion, I think, but for those who've had more personal experiences, I would love to know how you, so Jay and Pricilla and others, how you read those kinds of accounts, so how you interpret them through the lens of your own experiences. Do they, really challenge what you've been through? We all know people that, feel like they're getting specific messages of some kind that take in a certain direction. And this book for me just kind of says like, those are like absurdities. They're sort of the absurdity or the delusion of it is kind of the point. And, just kind of curious what others may think about that, but I'm sure we'll get into that later on.
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely, we'll get to that because it's changed a lot of how I viewed. I was saying before, but we came on. It's changed a lot of how I view the phenomenon, with my experiences and just in general. It's everything's been different since reading these books. So, yeah. Sean, what about you? This was your pick, and you keep rigging it. And your books keep getting picked somehow.
Well, again, this is a book that was recommended to me by somebody else, so I figured this would be a good way to bring it into the group. Vallée is a respected author, and I think I'll actually bring it back to the interview Jay and I had with Mr. Elizondo, and kind of the charlatans and hoaxers, words specifically used actually in this book, that kind of take up the vacuum, or kind of exist in the vacuum of UAP information that we have now. When there isn't stuff coming in, it gets filled with people making up, whether it's their own religions or clinging to different beliefs, or making little cult groups or whatever. And not all of it is always outright either and obvious and defined. It can be subconscious layers of ideas where people just congregate around for no real specific reason other than it fits their subconscious beliefs or sometimes conscious beliefs. And it's really dangerous to do with this stuff because I think the book lays it out really well that we don't really have any information to back any of it up that makes sense. Some of which are like the regressions that he studied, where some people were regressed that specifically did not have any encounters and came out with experiences that were pretty close, if not identical, to previously known abduction experiences, which that is extremely interesting to me. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean that they're not real, but does it mean that it's something that could or does exist in some sort of way in everybody's subconscious? I think at the end of the day, this book really forces you to open up your way of thinking about everything and realizing that any preconceived notions on what we're dealing with or what it could be doing or what it's about can really just go to the trash, because he kind of almost destroys each and every one of them. and I think more than anything, that's what I took away from most of this book is that, he talks about a controlled system, but I think almost the book left me with the frustration of living with an uncontrolled system, something that you don't have control of, and can't necessarily figure out, but you're also tempted constantly to land on something because it makes you feel better, but that's not necessarily reality either, So I think the book is almost like a big abstract painting for you to, put together your own thoughts while reading it or looking at it, I think
Yes.
it helps you sort through your own thoughts. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and even like reorganizing your own thoughts at times, because honestly, between American Cosmic and this, I'm like, everything that I'm just, it's really, I'm not just saying this to be dramatic, like it's really, really changed the way I viewed all of this. And I've lost a lot of, I've, not that I had a ton of followers, but I've lost a lot of the like love and light type followers. And they kind of don't like the fact that I'm saying like, hey, like, you think they're here to save us, but they haven't saved us since the beginning of mankind, from pre-biblical times, like, from Samaria to now, nothing's really saved anything. It's not, it's our shit show. You know what I mean? So I've lost a lot of people that way because even though I'm a very spiritual person, I also am still here on earth and I still see things a certain way. And I used to not. So this has changed all of that for me too, and it made me ask like myself more questions, because things are not as cut. If you think you know everything, it's like, be prepared. If you're not thinking, sure, you know everything. But if you decide to go down these rabbit holes and ask more questions, you're going to realize like you're just going to end up with more questions. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what everybody was just saying. And they haven't saved us from nuclear war in the past, but they have built really cool pyramids. So there's that. I'm just kidding. I'm playing around. I think this book is really fascinating. Vallée is really interesting for so many different reasons. I mean, not just because he went from being an astronomer that was one of the first people to map Mars, and then went on to be on the development team for the goddamn internet, at ARPA. The guy's had like a wild history. And I think one thing that's an interesting overlay is that Jacques Vallée, the way he puts it, when he's asked about his ufology and being the big guy in ufology and whatnot, he portrays it as a hobby, right? Now, I don't know anybody else, and it's important to remember that when he talks about tricksters, like in Passport to Magonia, when he talks about human tricksters and messengers of deception, it's a theme that keeps coming up. But we also have to remember that Jacques Vallée himself is a trickster, because I don't know anybody else who writes 14 books and that's their hobby. You know what I mean? A situation like that. And much of his work, even as a Silicon Valley venture capitalist investor, most that was seeded by NASA. So, this guy, everything wraps back into his kind of leading edge thought in many ways with regard to the phenomenon and ufology, be it nuts and bolts or be it elves. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things that that we find here is that there are a lot of nuts and bolts researchers, like you put it, Graeme, that kind of shy away from Vallée or don't put too much weight into him because he doesn't, outside of the back half of Passport to Magonia and Wonders in the Sky, he doesn't typically just sit around and list cases, right? And he gets into the wilder, more esoteric and more psychological aspects of the phenomenon, especially in this book. But for that reason, I find him actually super useful from a nuts and bolts perspective, because this book, Messengers of Deception, does an amazing job of dismantling, as you put it, Pricilla, like very effectively dismantling like a whole wing of ufology and paranormal studies that wants to make the mysterious into a formalized religion in one way or another. And so in that way, this book that was written in 1979 is incredibly prescient, incredibly important, and it still feels very timely right now, because some of the UFO cults, and for those that are watching, I mean, the general crux of the book, the general thing that he's saying here is that, you know, UFOs may be real and they may not be real, but the impact, like Diana Pasulka did, says that it doesn't matter if they're real or not, because they have implications on human psychology and the way people try to manipulate each other. I think that in a nutshell could be seen as kind of like the central thesis of the book. And again, he's being a trickster by doing that. I'll end there, but before we kind of reflect on that or whatever else we'd like to. But the start of the book, it's called The Case Against the Spacecraft. And he spends like 40 pages with ridiculous assertions that are huge generalizations that he would normally never do. And then he goes on to do the rest of the book, right? And like Graeme put it, you know, there's these weird elements that he throws into his books where it's like, why the fuck is that there? Like, what? Sorry, I cussed. I hope that's okay.
You're fine. You're fine. I'm not getting any money off of anything, so you could cuss all you want.
All right, but you know, there's a lot of bizarre elements to the book. I'll leave it at that for now.
The psychology aspect is really really struck with me, because as somebody who's, and you know, some of you guys have too, who have studied the early documents on, you know, UFOs. What sticks out to me most is like the Robinson panel, but other paperwork that came before that were really focused on the psychological aspect of this.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time they sent it to the Federal Civil something board to give it a full psych evaluation and to give recommendations for that. And the CIA did that. You know,
they basically thought they was messing with people's heads, or it had the potential to do that, didn't they?
And it is.
He brings that up again,
and
and like you said, it is
just not in the way that you would think. You know,
Yeah.
like it's not like, you know, when people read that and read those documents, they think we're all just kooks or whatever, and that may be the case. But I mean, if you just, but it's still true.
Well, like on a
that it's
personal
messing
level
with
too,
people's
right?
heads. And
Like
yeah,
on a
and it
personal, you could
alters
never tell
behavior.
anybody about it. You could never read a paper about your, you know, as a military person or whoever you are. You could never, even if you never mention it to anybody ever again, it affects you in that way.
I mean, there's a reason. Like one of the first things they wanted to look into was the ability to not only create but control the phenomenon for psychological warfare. I mean, because it affects people psychologically, you know. And they went on all these studies, and as Vallée noted in the book, that the Condon report came and went, other reports came and went, and the sightings still happen. People still report things.
Yeah.
And you know, considering what can happen with the different religions and cults that are made up from this sort of thing, it is, you know, dangerous.
Yeah.
I did
James-
enjoy that he did go into the cult stuff, because I like studying different religions and psychology as well. So I think that I found it super interesting that he was there studying these cults at the early formation of it, like was it T and Doe from Heaven's Gate or whatever? Is that who they're called? I know but he said there's 3 aspects of the UFO problem: physical, psychological, and social. So he, you know, and none of that has changed. Like Jay said, like every time I was reading this book and I was like, wait, when was this written? I had to keep going back, because I was like, this is exactly stuff we're still dealing with. But I would like to, if you guys want to go around and like ask a question to each other or the panel, that would be, I think that'd be fun. So Graeme, do you have anything you want to ask the people here, or anything you want to add to what Sean just said?
I was going to add something first of all, then I'll try and think of something when I'm talking. Jay mentioned about the mass kind of psychology and the effects that had, and then Pricilla, you mentioned about whether people have the answers when they're parts of these cults and these contactee societies, and not having the answers. And he makes a point quite firmly that if we're expecting like the visitors, let's call them that, to have the kind of the answers and to save us from ourselves, we've got another thing coming, because it's not going to happen. And I think that's that kind of strand always goes through ufology from the first days of the contactee cults. You can go back to like Daniel Fry and George Adamski and all the rest of it, and they'll have this kind of don't worry about necessarily what's going to happen on Earth, because we're going to be saved from nuclear war, or we're going to be saved from polluting the planet, or pick a subject, pick a horrible end, and we're going to be saved by it. And actually, we're not necessarily. They're not going to necessarily come down. We could be a lab experiment for all that we know. There's a passage in the book that's funny enough that I would like to know what people's kind of views are on this. Is this likely, or is this just something in people's heads? Because he goes to one of these meetings and he meets a lady who he asks, do you ever meet extraterrestrials? And she turned around to him and said, I meet them everywhere, in the street, in the stores. They're here, they tell me what to do, they stop me when I'm about to make mistakes. Which is the same thing on a personal level. It's like, is somebody controlling what you're doing? Well, that's just, to me, I mean, I don't know what people here think, and that's why I'm asking the question, but to me, that's human interaction. We're always talking to people, and it doesn't matter what walk of life they're from. We gather bits of information and we feed them into our brain, and that then works out our course of action, whether we do the right thing or the wrong thing, or whether we think it's moral or immoral. But we make our own decisions. But then saying, well, that's because they're extraterrestrial, to me, that's just like somebody being a bit kind of sort of just making things up to like suit a pattern. But actually, it's nothing of the kind. But I'd be interested in what the panel think.
Well, that's kind of how people talk about, some people talk about God or Jesus,
religion,
or whatever,
yeah.
right? He's everywhere, omnipotent, omnipresent. Whatever I do, whatever I think of, whatever decisions I make, are guided by that. So yeah, it's very true, very interesting. More on the psychological aspect for sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah, whoever wants to respond to that, feel free.
yeah, it reminds me a bit of what it's something that we were talking about the other day, Sean, which is that, and I think this is again part of this book. It's very important that he brought up American Cosmic. It's pervasive in there as well, with Diana Pasulka's brilliant work, and of course Jacques Vallée as a character.
Yes, she
in
finds
American
herself
Cosmic.
in this situation too, right? Like a lot of the things that we're going through. Remember the part in her book where she was like, I came to Jacques with this, like, I knew how it worked. I figured it out. I nailed like the religion aspect of it. I knew exactly what, and then he tells her something and she's like, wait, never mind.
Yeah,
And she's brilliant. She's a brilliant person. So it's just like,
absolutely. I think from the people that I've heard comment on him, and this came up, I think, in that Wired profile that came out a week or two on Jacques Vallée, that one of the most useful things about Jacques Vallée, if you know him as a friend or a colleague, is that he's incredibly good at completely casually dismantling your preconceptions, or whatever you're kind of hypothesizing. He, like a laser pointer, will focus on the weakness in your argument. And I'm sure that's frustrated many people over the years, and including people within our own field. There are a lot of people that considered Jacques Vallée and his shifting, evolving thought to be kind of like a Judas within our own field in a lot of ways. And I find that in some ways to be, when we look back at the career of this 82-year-old man, I think that's one of the best things about him, is that he's challenged our preconceptions, and that he's made people think harder about what's going on, and that he is kind of an inauthentic narrator. Like, you can't quite trust what he says sometimes in some of this stuff, right? He spends 40 pages trying to say that flying saucers don't exist, and then he goes on to talk about how they do exist. He goes
it's
back
almost
and
like
forth,
we're
even
reading his
within
thought
one text.
process. Do you know? Like, you know how like when you're thinking through something, like you have all these like random thoughts and your aha moment, and then like 10 minutes later you're like, that wasn't that's not right either. It seems like he's giving us every theory he comes up with, every thought process that he's going through.
It's almost as if he is a messenger of deception.
Yeah, what are you doing, Jacques?
Credits.
I think it's really it's interesting that a computer scientist essentially is kind of pushing us to some different associations here. And I loved that he, kind of ends the book bringing elements of computer science into the model of reality itself. And I think we're seeing a lot of that conversation take place in modern ufology, where we are, particularly when we're talking about consciousness, a mental universe, sort of how things are connected. There seems to be this, and to your kind of point, Graeme, there's like this like associative quality of existence itself. Like there's like a just like in our own minds, where we communicate, we're using words, but those words are creating symbols, and they connect in our minds with other ideas, and those ideas connect with other ideas. These are like associations that are occurring not in a as he points out, not in a linear sort of space-time way, but in a kind of abstract sort of intermingled way, a neural network way, if you will. And so I think that there's, if we think about that in relation to the phenomenon itself, what we're looking at here is sort of a drive towards sort of new ways of association in thinking, period. So, and I can tie this back to history as well. You brought up kind of the salvific quality of disclosure. Academia and I kind of talked about disclosure in our last episode. But there has always been this element that sort of once revelation occurs, there will be this sort of salvific moment where our problems will be solved, etc. That's a part of really human culture from the very beginning, right? So, what I see in kind of that grand arc from the past to now is this process of refinement in a way, and it's imperfect and it's not linear. It's not like we can say each successive generation makes progress that they don't ever regress. It is a kind of a spiraling type of progress, maybe in an integral theory type of way, where we are associating our lived experience with phenomenal experience. We are laying onto phenomenal experience elements of our lived experience, repackaging that, and then new phenomenal experience arises. That process is recursive. So there's some, almost like a teleological purpose to the universe itself, that we are just a part of that mind at large. We are engaged together in this meaning-making endeavor that brings greater sort of whatever it may be, beauty or awareness, or sort of higher levels of consciousness to reality itself. I know that's like I just went from like one place to another and went crazy woo on everyone, but how else do you try to tie all these things together other than saying this is just some sort of technology that is like messing with all of our brains, and we're here we are just kind of subject to it at any point, anywhere, anytime.
Well, yeah, I think that consciousness is going to have to be part of the conversation. And we look at the way our brain, like neurons look, and then you look at kind of like diagrams of things like string theory and the universe and all that. Like there's not, like there has to be something to it. Otherwise, how if what he's saying is true, like they have the ability, one of the things he had suggested is like, they have the ability to kind of control what we're seeing. If that's true, that would make sense for a lot, as he pointed out in the book, but also like that is our subconscious. That is our, that is our subconscious at play. And it's also like our conscious life at play. And we're, like you said, like making this thing that out of everything that we've ever seen. And as mentioned before in American Cosmic, like we're basically like recording, like our brains are recording all the time, whether we know it or not, or realize it or not. And the brain cannot differentiate between a Steven Spielberg movie and your dog running across running in front of you. It's still an event in your mind.
Right.
So
And just a quick point there, not only is it just they who have an effect on us, we control what we create as well. We see this all the time. All of us look at events unfolding in the world, and we have very different interpretations of what is there. Another example in recent months, the color blue wasn't even a color that was in the lexicon or understanding in history.
Yeah.
So, the ways in which our minds map onto reality or perceive, literally do have an effect on what is there. And, quantum mechanics is telling us this as well, that the observer itself, us, plays a role in what is actually happening.
That is insane, because everything that we see, like our brain is just like, it's just a collection of things that we've gathered. And then we get this other outside input, and then we're just like output. Like our brain's just like, this is the output. And you can condition yourself to have certain, like, if you meditate like with certain tones or stuff like that, study to with certain music on, kind of like in a more, normal, like a more everyday
That's almost
idea.
the unique aspect of us being conscious, as consciousness
Yeah.
means being aware. So when that output comes and that input comes, you still have the choice to be aware of what is coming in and what is leaving, and being able to evaluate that before and afterwards.
But what if we're
Uh,
not aware of what they're putting out and they're just putting it out? Do you know what I mean? But then
Sure,
again, that's where art and music comes from, right? Where does that come? Like, we put it out and it's just
but
there.
that almost gets more to a discussion of just like complete chaos.
And do some people have filters, and therefore some people experience the phenomenon in
That's
different
true.
ways? People like Jay, Sean, Pricilla. I don't know whether you have, Nathan, but I mean, as far as I'm aware, I haven't. I've seen something, but that's all. I've never had anything happen personally. But so maybe I have a different filter.
Yeah,
That's true.
completely. What's interesting, I have a good question. Jay, why don't you go? But I have a good next question whenever we're ready for
Yeah, I
that.
think that Nathan or Jay or Sean, you guys are all, it's your turn to ask a question or a comment.
Go ahead, Jay.
Sure. One thing that this reminds me of, I think we touched on this when I was first on Quantum Witch Cafe, Pricilla. There's this notable thing that happened, an experience that I had back in my mid-20s, I guess. I was on, and to make it super brief, I was vacationing with a group of people. There's about a dozen of us. We saw these strange orb lights, and at least one person took pictures of these orb lights while we were out in the situation, and they put on kind of like a weird show, and we eventually started walking back towards the vacation house, and a couple of the orbs kind of like tore off along the path that we were going to and hung around by the house before it disappeared. And that's not the craziest part of the story. The crazy part of the story is that in the morning around the breakfast table, just like 10 hours later, only half of the people remembered that it had happened. And there were 2 or 3 people there that swore up and down that it did not happen, and were like
Wow.
visibly frustrated with the rest of us that they would have somehow forgot that, or that would be. And for years I was like, how did that energy make us forget, right? And the older I get, the more that I'm right now, I'm kind of in, I think that there are aspects to the phenomenon that makes you forget stuff. I think that happens. And at the same time, I think our brains do an exceptionally good job throwing stuff into the recycling bin that it can't make sense out of.
Which could be a lot, right?
Yeah.
With their technology, where they come from, what they look like, even if it's just like an energy signature of what they look like, because like we know that all the matter is just a bunch of little vibrating things, and then now we know they're waves, and then you get smaller and they might be strings, and it's like so
But
it's just
I mean, that could also be a part of like the theory, like that story Gary Nolan was telling, his favorite UFO story, where they take pictures of it, and they're looking at it, it's over their car, everything is a fantastic looking thing, and then they get back and look at the pictures, and it's like a little dot that's there,
yeah.
or this thing I was just watching on Earth Lights. I forget his name because he's still new to me, but he's been talking about that for a while, the Earthlight things, I guess, and them being possibly intelligently controlled. But he told a story where, he saw and other people saw them, these lights or orbs from one side, and people from the other side were looking in the same direction and couldn't see anything.
That's
It's
crazy.
just like, but that kind of leads me to like what the question was that I wanted to ask, which is, the kind of trickster aspect of it. I know we talked about this already a little bit, but I guess more for you, Graeme. One of the cases that are mentioned in the book is the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Yeah.
And it's an intense case, and all of this I feel like could be like the argument for people having psychological issues could be made if it wasn't for these little things that are thrown in there that are these physical aspects that correlate to a sense of ours, whether it be, whatever it may be. And in that case, looking it up or whatever and finding the file on it, there's a radar return and a visual return that they wind up saying is due to a temperature inversion on the same frickin' night, So it's like, for you being a nuts and bolts guy, I know you don't go too far into like making decisions on what's true or what's not when it gets, too far out of that or any of it really, because how can you, right? But
Yep.
Does it make you, take stories like that more into account when it's, correlated with something physical like that, like a radar return, or if there was like some odd material or a picture or something?
It makes it more kind of attractive, if you can use that term. But I think the way I look at it is I have no frame of reference. I think that's why I fall down in terms of being able to understand what's going on with the psychological side and the experiencer side. Contact. It's not something I've had personally, so I've got no frame of reference. I've got nothing to judge. Whether what somebody's saying is the truth or not. It's not that I'm doubting them. I wouldn't do that. But I think it's just the fact that I don't have anything to be able to say, oh yeah, I can understand that. Well, that may not be true. There, that seems quite plausible. It's just because it's all completely out there. It is almost like you're coming across a movie script for the first time if you never knew about the phenomenon, because it's just so outlandish. But for the people who are involved, it's incredibly real, and therefore, excuse me, I still can't get my head around whether or not it is true. And somewhere like Jay might have experienced something. I am like your friends on the path who may have not seen it. You're desperately, or somebody is definitely telling me a tale that they were whisked away into a flying saucer, and I don't know whether it's true or not. I have to go on their word. But whether that's true or not, because we've heard in the past that people have made up stories, and unfortunately there is that element in ufology as well, and you have to throw that in the mix, and therefore sometimes you have to treat all stories with a little bit of a grain of salt, but you'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So it's a very fine line. I don't know what the answer is to that at all.
I guess kind of where I was getting was it like, this is going to be really impossible to do, but throw everything about or have learned or have read or whatever about UFOs, abductions, experiences, all of that, and just take two situations. One is a Betty and Barney Hill type situation where that's all you have is their word and their stories and what they're telling you. And the other one is the same exact one, except you have an unidentified radar return. And those are the only two you have to go off of. It's like in one case you'd be like, you guys are freaking nuts. In the next case you're like, at least you're like, now that's interesting.
It makes it more plausible. But when you look at some of the radar visual cases from the 1950s, and you see the kind of information they were going through, and they're still being told they're not seeing anything, and yet you've got things, you've got your proof, if you like, to back it up. So people are not hiding to nothing, almost trying to get even into the realms of something that's even maybe a little bit more harder to swallow by a lot of the general population. Although actually, when you probably do talk to people, they do accept that it's quite possible that people have been sort of, well, the real word used to be abducted. It's nowadays, obviously people use different terminology nowadays. But
it's just almost unfair.
I don't know what the answer is.
The phenomenon does that,
Oh, of course,
I'm just going to give this little piece there, so I have to struggle and think about this
Right.
the rest of your life.
Right.
And,
Well, like
well, and the
imagine,
radar thing, right? Like the radar thing's a
Yeah.
very tangible thing, and we have, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in all the documents, and just from me, like kind of looking at the ones that you've shared, you do see like there is something happening, but why is it being so elusive in what it is? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I know you want to leave us to, like, some people say, oh, well, they're just leaving you to your thing, basically. They're just here to observe. Or, oh, well, they're, I'm like, it's super weird to me. But I mean, it's weird to all of us that they won't just like be straightforward and give the same answer to anybody that's seen something.
Well, there's a trickster element again, isn't it? Because I'll go back to Foo Fighters. They were being seen, but they weren't being seen
Absolutely.
on radar, even though they were right on your wingtip, or they were just in front of the aircraft, and that was well within the range of radar systems of those days. And then you go into the 50s cases, which Sean, you've been looking at, and you'll see blue book cases, case after case after case of pilots seeing things at night, but they don't appear on the the backseater's radar either. So they've got some kind of, is it a technology, or is it just a way of actually putting into people's heads, look, I'm not seeing anything on the scope? It could be as simple as that. Some kind of mass kind of psychology where they're just basically blinding people, what we would call now, jamming, but it's actually jamming people's heads to be able to actually pick up this information.
It's not just jamming the equipment, it's jamming our
No,
minds.
it's jamming people's
Even
minds.
if their
Yeah.
bosses on the
Nathan.
ground or whoever who are just like constantly pushing back, these people, like, you can only know if you've actually been through it or seen it. But I can imagine if I was in a fighter jet and has seen as close to I saw in person, my real experience up there or whatever, and I come back down and somebody's telling me it's Venus, and how pissed off you are, but then you're talking to other pilots and like, yeah, it's Venus, I guess. I don't know. Venus is weird.
Yeah.
And like how that
Always
must
Venus,
haunt
right?
you the rest of your life.
Haunted by Venus.
know?
That should be
Yeah.
somebody's. Nathan,
But
what
think
you
of
were
it.
going to
What
add?
if they
Oh,
really
sorry.
are from Venus? Then they're not lying.
Man, who
Right.
not from Venus? Come on, you're not? I thought
well,
this is the Venusian Book Club.
yeah. So I guess the question, and I would ask, how do as experiencers, how do you guys read books like this that are decades old, that have, kind of wrestled with these sort of individual moments of revelation and the coming and passing of prophecy mediated to some of these groups? How does that change your own view of your experience? If your experience has carried with it like a level of specificity of message that you need to do X with your life, or you need to tell people it's this, or you need to, if there's something that you came away with from that experience that felt like you were compelled to do X, how does reading about these experiences in the literature change your relationship to that experience? I don't know, Jay, if you want to take that one first.
Sure. I think that's a great question. I'll try to be brief. One thing that I think is important here is that Jacques Vallée does a great job of, for himself anyway, defining kind of what's the difference between just an experiencer or somebody that has an experience or an interpersonal communication with some being that appears to not be of our civilization, and a contactee, right? And here's a great quote. It's quick. And talking about this guy Jacques Bourdas, who basically encountered a humanoid being that kind of sounds like the conception of a Nordic in the Pyrenees, and he says, okay. Jacques says, this had been a fruitful discussion as far as I was concerned. Bourdas had demonstrated a critical ability that contactees usually lack. Their commitment to a particular source, the source of what they claim to be their quote-unquote wisdom, is generally so high that it borders on religious fanaticism, and indeed often triggers such fanaticism in their believers. Yet Bourdas was open-minded. And I think that I don't want to speak for all experiencers or all contactees or whatever, because I can't, and I wouldn't want to do that. But I think that's been a pretty pervasive definition for a while, that contactees do that in terms of embracing what they hear as the truth. And for me, I resist that. it's not because I haven't been told things that were in situations like that sometimes turned out to be true, sometimes turned out to be false, sometimes they're just absolutely unknowable and I never would know them. But I keep recognizing the folly of believing everything you hear, because just because you're talking to the smartest person in the room doesn't mean that she's right or that she's even telling you the truth. And I try to remember that as much as humanly possible, especially like we were saying earlier, when you're not even sure what that intelligence or that entity even truly looks like, and as some people say, that might have a lot to do with that might be to do with deception. It could also be that some of these beings aren't native to, that they aren't understandable to the way that we've evolved our senses in a normal way. And so there's a necessary element of holography or projection or something that has to happen there. But, I don't know, and yeah. Does that make sense?
Do you find what
It
does? Do you
does make
find
sense.
yourself like really turned away by those that don't kind of approach it with that level of sort of complexity? Because I'm hearing what you're saying, that you're not settling on a particular, it is X. You're very much open to what the experience taught you, is teaching you. You're continually kind of relating with it. It's not a static thing that just happened and it doesn't change you over time. You are
Right.
changing with that. But how do you react to those that don't seem to possess that quality? Do your hackles kind of go up? How do you wrestle with that?
I feel challenged by it sometimes, like with the experiencer group, for example. There have been a couple notable cases where people have kind of had the air of a contactee, or feel that their particular bent on something was the proper way to look at things. And that's actually something that is a stated policy. It's in our terms and conditions that people aren't supposed to proselytize with each other. And that it's actually kind of that people can be kicked out of the group for not being open-minded, essentially, which is a large gray area, and we recognize that, and we have to kind of look at it as a case-by-case basis. But it's one of those things where it's like, it when you see it. Do you know what I mean? And it's challenging because it really comes down, for me, it comes down to a position of free will and agency, and whether it's welcome or not. Do you know what I mean? If somebody just has a bizarre experience like this guy Jacques did, and some humanoid being says something that they then take as the truth, and it's absolutely going to happen, like the world's going to end in 10 days or something like that, whatever the hell it is, but say it's 40 years out, so the person has to kind of question it the whole time. I feel sorry for that situation. I mean, I do recognize that I see these tendencies, and there is a lot of deception, and it's super appropriate that Vallée called it messengers of deception, because it's often not just the beings themselves, but it's then these cult leaders like Tian Do, Marshall Applewhite, and people like that then take something that could have been an honest to God or honest to them experience, and then because of their own personal psychology, their own way of processing trauma, their own way of processing the big mysteries of life, they feel that they need to put themselves in the pulpit because of it, or something like that. And I get it, but I'm resistant to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like a game of telephone, right, guys? Where like even if they did tell you something, and as you mentioned, there could be like a whole, like, we have cultural differences on Earth. Here we're dealing with maybe like a species type of cultural difference where they're saying, like, trying to tell us in a way that we understand, but as we see so many translations even on Earth and in this, I don't know, dimension, there's some words that other languages and cultures have that some, like English, it doesn't have a word for it. So that's something I've often wondered about, and I'm like Jay in the fact that, like, my explanation from the experiences has changed as I learn more and I read more, I think it's really dangerous and scary to be somebody that was given a message and then tell everybody and then it never happens, which we see over and over. And I also have a lot of like compassion for that because I've had friends like that have received like psychic messages and it really messes with them. They'll be like, I'm so confused. Like they told me this was going to happen. And then it gets more extreme. Now people are saying, oh, well, I must have hopped to another timeline. So it's actually kind of dangerous for that person and their grasp with like reality. So that's one of the scarier things that happens, you know. When I was little, I was sure that these beings were angels and demons. I was sure because I was raised Catholic. And now I'm like, wait a minute, like nothing really had like wings, or they never said they were an angel, or nothing ever said, hey, I'm a demon. Hey, you know what I mean? Beelzebub here. So that never happened, but it was my interpretation with like being a little girl and knowing what I knew from like Bible studies and, you know, being raised Catholic with saints and all that stuff. So I try to hold space for people no matter what they're experiencing, but I think that anytime somebody 100% agrees to an answer or a truth, it's dangerous to their development. And if they're in a prominent position, like if you're a scientist, for example, then or a cult leader or a religious figure, it's dangerous because you're not allowing for any growth to happen. And a lot of people do that because some people do it because they're afraid of being wrong, but some people do it because they really truly believe that what they've been told is the truth, even if it doesn't happen. And they'll keep making up more and more, or they'll keep having more messages come through to explain it.
So the one of the frustrating parts of, you know, the UFO thing and beings and non-human entities in these messages, and what you just said about, I used to think that they were this because I was raised angels and demons. Now I'm like this. But in the end, either one of those you can't really prove or disprove. You know, if you dig far enough and keep asking the question why and how, you'll notice that you can't prove any of them. You know, prove or disprove, which is very interesting. So it's difficult. But one thing, you know, having been raised Christian as well, what has kind of tossed me off of that path as I grew older was, you know, if there's this thing or there's this God that is as smart as is told to me, right? Especially when it's, you know, walked as a human or whatever. And that person would know how extremely difficult it is for a human to believe what this thing is telling you, you know. So then to expect me to actually carry it out, that thing, that superior intelligence would know better, and how complicated and difficult that would be to actually do that. And so the whole scenario of that gets kind of tossed on its butt because something smarter than you would realize how impossible of a task and how much they're asking of you to begin with, you know. And so, like, you know, there's all these religions and everyone who believes one is so convinced that it's true, right? So convinced, and they live their lives for it. So why would this God that you picked to tell me to worship, or this alien or this UFO or this cult or whatever, why would this one be right over that one? And if this one was really that smart and intelligent, it would know better. It would know that it's an impossible choice for me to really make.
That's definitely the
You know?
reasoning, right? Like people that I could see that happening because I mean, I wish they would have told me what to do with my life because I'm still confused, but
So
you
that's why I
know?
say you can't only take those messages or whatever so seriously, because
Right.
if it really expects you to take it to heart and act on it, it must not be that smart.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
we got to take into account people that are like in some weird transition or like maybe almost pray because of like where they are, you know, with mental health or events in their life are more likely, or like maybe they've lost hope. They're looking for something to tell them what to do or looking for an answer, any answer. And that's the first thing that happens. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of scary to think that um, if there is human aspects involved in this phenomenon or if there isn't, it's like, it's kind of like a horrible way to go about things. Like it's a cheap shot almost. We don't have a lot of time. I don't know. I know a lot of people are going to be going to Vinny's channel at the hour, but I know I can catch up. But I did have one question. But first, I'm
What
gonna
if people
get
think
like
we're serious? What'd you do to them?
Vinny knows we love us, even though he's my dropout. I say you're my dropout, Vinny, because you didn't read the book by him and now you're gone. I'm gonna get the group, the panel's book suggestions, and then I have a question for you guys about part 3 of the book, which covers cattle mutilations and mutilations and all that. So, Graeme, what is your book
It
suggestion?
all comes back to Trickster.
Okay, so
Vallée,
it's
they're
gonna be
basically
again. It's an oldie but a goodie. So it's Timothy Good's Above Top Secret.
Oh, cool. All right.
Above
Yeah.
Secret.
Interesting.
I'm gonna
Huh.
put Tim Good because I'm lazy. I don't want to write his whole
And,
name out.
and if it does get picked, it's still fairly cheap on eBay, so you should be able to get a cheap copy.
Yeah, guys, get your book, as soon as possible, because if you want to participate. I'm mostly talking to you guys in the panel. I'm just kidding. All right, Nathan.
I have a suggestion, but I'm actually inclined to go with Graham's suggestion as well. I'm just going to double vote here.
That's all right. You're allowed to do that.
I feel bad for Graham because a lot of the books we read are the more
I don't mind.
speculative areas.
Hey, we kicked off book club with Graham's book, because it was
You certainly
amazing.
did.
So
I have to refute that, Nathan. Everything we talk about pretty much is speculative.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Yep.
all right, Sean, you ready?
This one I'm picking just for Graham. It's called The Planetary Commission.
Oh, you're a
I'm just
wild
kidding.
man.
I'm totally kidding.
Oh.
I wouldn't. He's like, oh God, no. I'll triple his pick.
Oh.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Triple
Looks
is
like
good.
we're reading Above Top Secret.
Stacking the deck.
Maybe we are. Okay.
Well, now I'm curious. Now I'm like, ooh.
I could read a line for this. This chapter 3, starts the divine plan.
Mm,
Ah.
there we go.
It was, it's one of those books
Mine's-
where you're like,
The alien gave me an Instapot recipe.
Mhm.
by the author
That was
of
my
the
only
Super
message
Beans.
to humanity. Get an Instapot.
Let's see. Maybe I'll. Geez, now I feel like I don't know. Now I feel like I almost want to make just like another Timothy Good pick, just for fun, to have like a false sense of choice.
I think that you secretly want like Graeme to have to read some ridiculousness. I kind of want him to, because I cannot wait for like the Graeme insults to some of these wild books. Like Graeme insulted somebody. It was like the classiest
I
comeback, and
never
I've seen
insult
Vinny do
people.
it. You don't insult, but you have these like amazing like nut shots, and you just punch somebody in the nuts real fast and walk away on Twitter. And I can't remember what you were saying yesterday, but you commented on something, and it was like the classiest nut punch I've ever seen. Or like you're just like, okay, person with 0 followers, blah blah blah, and I was like, damn, Graeme, that was like that was so classy the way you said it. But
I always feel there's never
was the
a good way to argue with somebody on Twitter, and if you just resort to insults, then you just drop to their level, and they're going to beat you over the head with insults, and you're always going to lose. So it's always nice just to be nice to people even when you're not being nice to them.
I wanted to like make you an award. Like so far, Graeme gets the classiest diss of 2022 when I read that.
Thank you.
All right, I think Sean might change his book, or if he's messing with us.
kidding.
But Jay,
He's going to mess with my head. isn't he?
interdimensional. Hey, that actually looks good.
It does.
It is,
yeah.
but it's
All right,
I'm just
Jay, what
I
do you
think
got?
Sean's had about
trying to
3
get the
picks
biggest ones
by now.
possible.
Let's see what's the page count on Above Top Secret? Just curious.
Well, the paperback version I've got.
We'll need
if
a
you
Better
don't
couple
look
get
at-
it today,
If you don't look at
basically.
the appendix, because it's got about 100 pages of like sort of
Sure.
pictures at the back. It's in the 400s, 440.
Fatty.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll need a couple months.
A little light reading.
And actually, if you get rid of all the kind of the forward and the sort of the page counts and all the rest of it, you're looking at about maybe 400 pages.
Some of the forwards in these books could be chapters. I'm like, just make it a chapter.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The forward
Um,
kind of summed up this last book's whole thing.
Yeah.
To be quite honest.
Mhm.
All right. I mean,
You could
gosh,
stop there, read
Do
the
you know,
last one.
I mean, I must admit, I'm prejudging, but I thought it was quite quick to read. I remember when I first read it back in 1989 or whatever it was.
We're all going to be struggling. Like, yeah, quick read.
93. Yeah, 1987 it was published. Yeah, I thought it was about then. But then again, I tend to rattle through stuff anyway. So,
all right.
I think I'll go with just for. I mean, it's a false choice, but I'll do Timothy Good's Earth and Alien Enterprise.
Because I've never read that, so yeah, interesting.
Okay, but yeah, so I'm happy to read Above Top Secret as well, but just to provide a false sense of choice, maybe if nothing else. But Pricilla, what do you want to read? Hopefully it rhymes with Mimothy Mud.
Well, this might be like a selfish choice because I read it already, but I listened to it, but I want to read it. Trinity with another valet, Paola Harris, because she said yes to coming on my channel. And
I guess we're reading that then.
I would totally read that as well. Okay, so do we pick the name out of a hat, or are we asking Twitter this time? Yeah. What are we doing?
Okay. You know what? Since it's just us, I'll do a poll. Is that fair? Even though we only got 3 choices because 3 of you guys picked. I'm fine with it. I haven't read that, so we will do a poll. I'll do a poll. There we go.
Okay.
All right, real quick before everybody migrates over to Disclosure Team to see Lou and Sean and Dan and all those guys. Quick thoughts on cattle mutilation. And I want to start with Graeme.
Oh, quick! Yeah. Luckily, I figured it out in 2 sentences.
All right, Graeme, your thoughts.
It used to frighten the hell out of me when I first read it, about how, you know, the kind of all the black helicopters element in it, the kind of strange, the precision, the surgical precision that was involved, and it just really weirded me out. The only thing that ever came close to actually sort of making me kind of be frightened lying in bed reading at night when I was a kid was the Kelly Hopkins-villes, the kind of the green goblin things that were floating around and sounded like a bucket when you were shooting at them. That was about the closest I got to being really scared about kind of things, and it was just this whole kind of weird element about, you know, animals being spirited away and or being dropped by things, or just by the coming across them and finding these strange cuts. And I've never ever been really comfortable reading about it. Just it's one of those things that just really kind of makes me kind of should
I can understand that because they're just animals. Like it's so sad.
Because it could be us.
Yeah. And there has been some reports of us being
table.
On that end of it. Yeah. So, Nathan, what about you?
They're going to town in that Disclosure Team video. They're talking
about something
pretty serious. I can see
Lou's not there yet, though.
Well, it creeps me out, too. I'll throw this weird speculative...
If you guys got to go. It's fine.
I'll throw this speculative wrench. It's kind of weird to me that cattle mutilation, cattle and the importance of cattle in religious ceremony in history. So I'm not saying there's a correlation there, but it's a little bit weird to me that there is a long history of animal sacrifice and religious ritual.
Poor cows, they're like, not again.
No, can't get the break.
Do we have time to throw in the human mutilation?
Yeah, sure.
No, I mean
I'm not in a rush. I will catch up on anything I've missed, but I don't want to have people stay if they don't want to stay. So. You notice the chat stopped, so I'm assuming everybody's like, okay, bye. But for people listening later, I don't mind. Sean, what do you want to say? Cattle, humans, all of it?
To me, it's just adding. It's just another aspect of the same thing. To be quite honest with you, it's more confusion. It's more, hard facts mixed with hoax, mixed with other situations. There are some mutilations. There is no possible way anybody living could do this right now at this point with these cuts and in this way. And then there's other ones where, they'll take samples and find mescaline in the calf system or whatever, or a drug or a ritual thing set up, not too far away. And there's all these things combined, and it makes it almost like impossible to get to a root cause because there's so much messiness involved with it. But there's enough real, genuine mystery to keep you searching. But there's always something trying to screw it up for you, Like
Yeah.
one of the worst parts of ufology is, the grandstanders or the people who tend to know the answer, just like these mutilations. The people that come in and tend to know what this is or that is, and it just screws up the genuine mystery for everyone. Like, and I think the cattle mutilations are just another layer on top of everything else, and it all matches in that it's chaos and it's
Absolutely.
uncontrolled.
Yeah. It is all over the
I
place.
would fight Vallée's controlled system by calling it an uncontrolled system, and how
Yeah.
to live with that uncontrolled system.
You heard it here. Sean would fight Jacques Vallée. That's what I heard.
Well, if Sean can get him on, holy crap.
Yeah, he doesn't respond to me. So
he doesn't respond to many people. I'm going to see him next week in Houston, though.
Okay, well,
I'm wondering how.
Put a good
I
word
mean,
in for
I'm
him.
not.
you need to
I'm
become his best friend.
I'm not planning that. I'm not assuming that I'm going to be able to like have breakfast with the guy or anything like that. But
Well, your mission is to have breakfast with him. All right.
I'll do my best.
We're gonna pretty you up and send you out there into the world.
Yeah, I hear he doesn't drink much, so I don't know how I'm going to be able to convince him of anything if that's the case. But as far as cattle mutilations go, or mutilations in general, I mean, I think it's fascinating. It's scary, but it's also fascinating. I mean, there's all the data points that people have brought up before in terms of people raise cattle in almost every area of the populated planet. So, and it's typically it's an animal where like loss and is kind of built into the process of raising cattle. And so it's kind of it's something that seems targeted maybe in the terms of acceptable losses. There's a lot of reasons why we can speculate about why cows, but in the end, I think one of the most important things is to kind of keep remembering that when we're talking, through the course of this discussion today, we've touched on Nordics, we've touched on cattle mutilations, we've touched on telepathic cases. We just, by kind of blindly walking through this without better taxonomies and better direction, we might have been talking about 8 to 12 different groups just in the course of, or species, just in the course of our conversation today somehow. You know what I mean? Between the orbs and the cattle mutilation and this, that, and the other thing, there could be a whole zoo's worth of other species out there that we're conflating as one or two things, and it may be a million zoos worth of species out there. But in the end, I think it's one of the more, cattle mutilation is useful because it's one of those things that can get people.
I just heard that part. Cattle mutilation is useful.
Okay, I really hope somebody clips that out and makes me look like a goddamn monster.
Cattle mutilation is useful.
Yeah, that's gonna be terrible.
It's gonna be like joining.
Oh shit! Oh yeah, good old J. Christopher. Cattle mutilation is useful king.
That's your next
Look,
T-shirt,
I just see
Sean.
Jay walking down the street getting hit with red, the red paint.
Yeah,
Prepare to be canceled, Jay.
Oh my god, I am so getting downvoted on this one. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm sorry I brought down UAP Book Club.
I like it. All right.
I'm sorry. Continue.
Why is it useful again?
Where do we go from there?
Well, I'm happy that we're discussing this book. There are so many things that came up in this book that we haven't been able to touch on today because it's a really
I know
rich resource.
it's such a deep book.
Yeah, and I would recommend it to anybody, especially maybe especially people that haven't really taken the time to think about how much their preconceived ideas and how much their belief systems have impacted their outlook with regard to the phenomena or ufology in general, because I think it does a great job of humbling the readership
Yeah.
in some ways, and making us question our own expectations, which is great.
Yeah. Right. If you ever find yourself maybe going towards one side or another too hard, you're like, man, I'm finding myself like a little too grounded with these specific beliefs. What do I have to really prove my effort here or my actions here? Read that book and then see how you feel.
Absolutely. Yep. Read anything by Jacques Vallée or American Cosmic, and you'll be like, wait a minute, what was I thinking earlier? Like, reform.
The thing is, too, though, I think it's important to think like you may not be wrong, but you just have to know you may not be
There's
right.
other things out there, exactly, or other answers. I'm sorry if anybody hears that. Speaking of cows, there's some
It's a
chimpanzees
it's
thing to
upstairs.
be in a spaceship like that.
Yeah. For anybody out there, if you want to be more confused than you were 2 weeks ago, read Jacques Vallée.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
That's my 14-year-old self talking after I read Passport to Magonia.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's the same now, 40 years later.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
A philosophical concussion. Read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I read Diana was talking about Nietzsche. I read that like in 7th grade, and I was like, my counselor. I saw a counselor. Other reasons, I'm not really crazy, but they had me talking to a counselor because I was in Catholic school and I was asking about spirits and checking out UFO books. So they had me see a counselor for that was one of the reasons, and they just thought, oh, this kid's like on the way to hell because she's asking questions. I got, I failed like their Bible study class, and anyway, I told her I was reading that, and she's like, why are you reading that right now? Like, he's a chauvinist and all this stuff. And I was like, well, you got to see like everybody's viewpoint, whether you like it or not, because that's how you grow and that's how you ask questions, and you might find things out about yourself or the other person that you never would have thought of otherwise.
Ask all the questions.
Ask all the questions, guys. We could talk about this book for like every day.
The first question she would ask is, there's a spaceship, where are the bathrooms?
And I'd be going with her because obviously girls gravitate to the bathroom.
Or to the bar.
Oh, yeah.
In the movies, we're watching a movie. It's like they're in this spot where they're there for a while. She's like, come on, where's the bathroom? That's not even possible. Like, that's how you gauge this stuff. Yeah, maybe that's the answer.
She's got the answers, yeah.
Got to go potty, right?
Well, there's the 2 takes I've got from this. Got to go potty and cattle mutilations are useful.
And I'm going to fight Josh.
Hey, you're getting a mug that says that, by the way.
On it.
Oh man!
Actually, I'm going to set one up on my Redbubble page, I think, tomorrow.
Yeah, cattle mutilations are really useful.
I've just got a thumbs up and a really
I'm going to remix it in a song
really
for sure.
dicky smile. Like, really.
Cattle mutilations.
You gotta go potty. Cattle mutilation. You gotta go potty. Anyways, if you're listening to audio only, I apologize.
Posing for the memes already.
Oh, if they're watching, you don't apologize? Okay.
No.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I've really appreciated this conversation. Despite, if I was going to get canceled over anything, it'll be I'm glad that it's hanging out
Don't
with you
let
guys.
Jay come to any cattle farms.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah.
Jay is doing the mutilations. That's what we figured out. All right, guys. It's so good hanging out with all of you. I had to go tame the wild beasts upstairs. I hear them being wild, and I don't know if their dad's ready for that. He's probably just ignoring him, but I can't block him out like that. So thanks everybody that's listening to audio only on Anomalous Podcast Network. And thank you for joining in the chat or watching on YouTube. Everybody on the panel's information is listed in the description below, as well as ways to support this channel and other channels, other people on this show. Thank you so much again. Like, subscribe, share, and don't be afraid to reach out to any of us. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.